Okay, so this is a very intimate panel now, which is, doesn't have to be a bad thing. We have Kristin. So let me start off with a question to you. So you direct New America's initiative on workers and technology. You also co-founded Shift, the Commission on Work, Workers and Technology. So you're essentially doing nothing but looking into the future of work every day. And so maybe you could explain a bit on how you actually do that. So what is your toolkit? What is your approach when you're trying to figure out what the future of work in the US and elsewhere might look like?
Oh, that's a great question. So this is such a funny a format when you're I feel like I should be miming somehow.
You can.
No one
anytime,
else can see me. So interesting question. So when we first started the Shift Commission, we were looking at how to bring together groups of leaders across communities to think about how work is changing and how to sort of look down the path 10 to 15 years in every industry, in the tech industry, in incumbent industries, in the startup world, in the NGO world, city government, everything that sort of had to do with how to connect with workers and how to connect workers with new opportunities in different ways. And we did that through initially economic scenario planning and having people really build stories and think through sort of a creative design-led, human-led process. We expanded that out through focus groups and through interviews with people and talking to people going forward. And now, having been doing this for the last several years, have moved into creating pilot programs in partnership with cities of all size across the United States. So we've done some initial design of community-led initiatives in mid-sized cities like Indianapolis and Phoenix. We're moving into smaller cities in West Virginia and other places, but basically to look at sort of what kinds of things workers are seeing as potential roadblocks and opportunities, and what kinds of things leaders of organizations are seeing, and then combining those two into what do we do as we go forward.
So when that journey has led you to pretty much any place in this country, you really went all over the place. What did you discover? Like, if you had to force yourself to sum up the key drivers of change or the key challenges when it comes to the future of work, what would that be? I know it's a very complex topic and it's a mean question to you, but I would love to hear the answer.
No, it's a great question. We see a couple big picture trends that are happening across the board. One is increased volatility in the kind of work people are doing and the income sources that people have. So it used to be that people had one job and they went there to that place and continued to work, from 9 to 5 with a set of responsibilities that were clearly defined. And we're seeing more and more that people are having more than one source of income. The work varies on how frequently you do it and what kind of work that you do. And there's a lot more self-determination and sort of individual initiative required on the worker than there used to be. There used to be a big role for the employer and the employing organization to set out what somebody was going to do. And we're seeing that there are still roles like that, but we're seeing more and more that people have to do that for themselves. So volatility is a big one. The ability to direct and use systems in different ways, whether that's automated systems, AI-driven systems, platforms, the need to understand data analysis and be able to use it effectively is a second big trend that we're seeing. And thirdly, really like place-based vibrancy we see. There's a lot of excitement in both sort of rebuilding urban cores in cities and in thinking about what drives somebody liking living in an area and liking doing work that enhances the sort of human-to-human interaction in that area. And so those are sort of three things that we see repeatedly in lots of different places.
Okay. One last thing before we move on a little bit to Lori. What I didn't hear a lot at all was the word automation. And today, automation was a big topic continuously, and people are kind of scared, rather pessimistic. You don't sound pessimistic at all. Why is that?
Well, I'm optimistic in the longer term, but I am worried about the impact of automation in the shorter term, particularly on workers with less traditional levels of education and at lower income levels. And I think that there's, because of automation and because the kinds of jobs that automation is changing significantly are at least right now jobs that are not as individually driven as some, there will be a disproportionate impact on people in the sort of 5 to 10 year range, and which means that as a country we really need to get serious about thinking through entrepreneurial training, thinking through coaching, thinking through the way to break down barriers and let people access the resources and opportunities that are out there in a really different way than we are right now.
Laurie, you're working for JD, which is the largest retailer in China, so it must be pretty large, and it's also the third largest internet company on this planet by revenue, actually. And so you guys are very actively shaping the present and the future of work for about 170,000 people that are employed by you. And maybe you can, let's start off with a very general question. Again, where can we see parts of the future of work in what JD is already doing today, and how is that similar or very different to what Kristin just shared?
Sure. So I think that when people think of the East or think of China, they think it's like very vastly different. And you were talking about things that we need to do, for example, in this country. But, you know, we see a lot of similar things perhaps happening faster. So maybe China gives a little bit of a glimpse into the future in that sense. And for JD, as you said, it's interesting that we are one of the most advanced companies in terms of like commercial application of automation. And yet we have 170,000 people. So maybe a way to sort of give a little bit of that context and that history so people understand what JD is. I did have a video that we can show.
Yes, exactly. Excellent point. Let's see if it works.
I assure you the video is much more exciting than if I told you verbally.
Here we go. Can we hear it? Okay, we can't hear the sound.
No one else can hear it either?
No. Can we turn on the TV? Okay, I'll just turn on the TV. Chris? Sorry. Can we turn on the TV, maybe, the volume?
I think it's on.
Yeah. So let's just use the normal TV sound for a moment.
What a novel concept.
Crazy, right?
The reason we need people to back up the system.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe you have to come a little bit closer. Okay.
To household goods and luxury. Largest retailer in China, online or offline. The company sells everything from imported seafood to household goods and luxury watches to hundreds of millions of Chinese consumers. CEO Richard Liu founded the company as a tiny offline electronics store. Today, it's the third largest internet company in the world. It is also pioneering cutting-edge technologies to transform global retail. Richard's vision was to provide consumers all over China with access to high-quality, authentic products, including in less developed regions such as his hometown in rural Jiangsu province. But because China lacked logistics and retail infrastructure, he made the bold decision to build his own network from the ground up. That network now covers 99% of China's population, reaching more households than any other distribution network, with unrivaled speed and efficiency. JD.com now has over 150,000 employees, including thousands of engineers in China and Silicon Valley. They're working on AI, robotics, drones, autonomous vehicles, and other state-of-the-art technologies that are revolutionizing the industry. JD operates hundreds of automated warehouses and a last-mile delivery network that can ship over 90% of orders the same or next day. JD works with and sources from the world's leading brands and suppliers, delivering high-quality, authentic, and imported goods to customers in big cities and remote rural villages. In China's most far-flung regions, its delivery drones can cut a full day's supply run down to just minutes. By tapping the vast data resources across its platforms and from its strategic partnerships with Tencent, Walmart, and Google, JD is creating new experiences for shoppers to buy whatever they want, whenever and wherever they want it. This technology and infrastructure allows partners to build trust with Chinese consumers in a more efficient and sustainable way. Building on Richard's original vision, JD is now sharing this retail technology and infrastructure more broadly as a service. It is enabling the expansion of other retailers, industries, and organizations for a positive impact on society. At JD.com, the future of retail is already here.
Great, thanks. So
Okay.
I think that you can see from the video, or the key takeaway is that like we are obviously investing a lot in researching automation and robotics, but it's meant to sort of like augment what companies or retailers were traditionally able to do. And of course, we still have a very large workforce. That's an important part of that.
Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about automation, is that something that here, it's very, it scares people for, probably quite good reasons. And how is that topic perceived in China? I mean, this is a very optimistic video, of course, I have to say, and that's probably why it was made. It's but what's the debate on the ground, or is there, or the emotions on the ground towards those technologies?
I think that there are some key cultural differences in China that the easiest way to think about them is sort of like the historical context. So it's a society that has over the course of only a few decades changed so much. I mean, year by year, you see new innovations being introduced, new consumer habits, industries are completely changing the way they work. And so there's a lot less legacy in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the way things are managed, in terms of the way people shop and everything else that need to be torn down and unlearned. And so when you're talking about innovation, it's not like a novel or scary concept as much, as in the West, because you're not talking about breaking things down that were around for hundreds of years. You're talking about like, well, it's business as usual. We wake up, do something new. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse. It's an experiment, and the approach to that, I would say, is, as you say, a lot more sort of optimistic and idealistic than you might find in a place where people are like, well, my dad worked at this factory, and now it's shutting down, so like what happens now, right? Because like the factories that you see in China today weren't around 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Kristin, what would you say are the key things that we should do, or what should happen in the US? So there's also a more optimistic perspective on what's going to happen. So how can we get to a desirable future of work, which for many people seems to be very, very, very far away right now?
Yeah. So one thing that comes up over and over again in discussions in every part of the country, but even more so in places that are not coastal urban cities, is the need for visibility into what kinds of categories of work will be out there and will be available to generate income for people in the next 10 to 15 years or so. A lot of times we hear like, I'd be happy to retrain, I'd be happy to reskill, I would as a high schooler or a community college student I would really love to know what to take. I just don't have a good sense of what kinds of things are out there that are going to be exciting, interesting, productive going forward, because I don't know the names of the kinds of jobs. I don't know where I get them. I don't know who the employers might be. I don't know if I have to generate them myself from a platform. And giving people, identifying what the opportunities are, both in a corporate setting and in a freelance setting, I think is really important. And then secondly, once there is additional visibility into what those things are, starting to think much more carefully about how people can get themselves the skills that are relevant to succeeding in those things, and sort of what action steps to take. And action steps really seem to be the thing that's lacking in the conversation. There's lots of conversations right now about what the future of work is and how to frame the problem and what the important questions are, and much less experimentation, as Lori was talking about, and much less sort of sense of innovation's good and maybe we'll screw it up, but we have to do something. And so I think think both for every institution, education, at the high school, community, and university level, at the training and work-based learning level, at the apprenticeship level, at the technology platform level, at the sort of new systems and AI connectivity level, like in all different institutions, thinking through like what do we do to identify the stuff and to coach people to getting there.
I think just to add on to that, I think one of the difficulties is like, there are people who are having the conversations you're having, which I think are really smart. And I think there's still a significant portion of people everywhere that are still stuck in the like, well, automation is replacing people, and still focused on that conversation. And it's hard to then like adjust yourself to the new reality when you're still thinking about the past. Whereas, companies, I think, that really are investing a lot in terms of automation and robotics and AI, they're thinking more about unlocking like possibilities of completely new ways of doing business. Like the assumption isn't that you're going to do business the same way and just change people out for robots. It's like, well, what more can you do? If you're a retailer, it used to be that your business was getting goods to stores and then convincing customers to come to those stores and buy those goods. But these days it's like, well, what else can we do? We can deliver to their homes. Sure. We can also deliver to their homes and then allow them to return them somewhere else or help them shop virtually. And all of these things are very actually labor intensive things to scale up. And so how do you do that? You do it with technology. And that once people, including the workers involved in that, learn that they're a part of like this sort of revolution, then that opens possibilities to like, well, what else can I do to move that forward, and how can I be a part of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and we really emphasize that, and which is part of, I think, the eventual optimistic view that when you talk about automation changing jobs and changing work, it isn't necessarily that it's going to replace people and make stuff go away, make jobs go away, but it will require a very different skill set, a problem-solving sort of interlocutor approach that is just a different way that we think about things right now. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Like talking about the vision and the imagination and the sense of how those pieces are going to fit together is really helpful for people so that they feel like they're part of a bigger picture. But also just, helping managers and helping companies and helping people who are implementing automated systems and AI understand what the choke points are and where they should bring people back in. We see as a category of jobs pretty frequently the sort of strategy, empathy, and person-to-person lifestyle enhancement in different ways as a whole category of jobs. I often call it creative lifestyle as a type of jobs, and it can be in hydroponic agriculture, and it can be in tourism. It can be in lots of different things where people are problem-solving and interacting with one another. But those kinds of things you're really seeing grow in lots of different ways, particularly when people feel like they're part of a bigger whole. It's a great point.
Okay, so what you're saying, I think, is the long-term view can be rather optimistic, but I think still there's so much pressure on the individual that has to change, that has to figure out all these things by themselves, that nobody is telling them what skills they need. You just mentioned that nobody's telling them what major fields they can go into. That all they hear is like, oh yeah, AI is now a big thing soon. So what's the truck driver in Minnesota going to do with that, And how can we translate that like long view optimism into something that people who are in their jobs right now can work with or can do anything about? So what can we tell these people? What can we offer them, or what should the government or what should organizations offer them? So who can provide that tool, that leverage they need?
Yeah, I mean, every sector of society can and should act to think about how to do that. The technology companies that are instituting new platforms should do it. Education institutions should do it. City services should do it. Like everybody should think about how to do that and how to infuse that sense of here's how you create an opportunity for yourself in education and in workforce training. I mean, that is a big element of workforce training that we haven't gotten behind. In some, and I think this might have been what you were getting at a little bit in talking about how China over the last 50 years has been in a sort of constant cycle of flux, and the baseline 50 years ago wasn't a particularly organized or traditional approach to work. And so you see that a lot in societies where people have often operated outside of traditional institutions, and either as small business owners or sort of independent, kiosk owners and that kind of stuff, like that there's a sort of sense of you have to figure out where the opportunity is and go after that we haven't emphasized as much in the United States in the recent past, in the last sort of 50 to 70 years, and thinking about how to re-infuse that.
We also have a question, but in the audience, but you can add on that first, and then we'll.
Sure. I mean, I can talk a little bit about what JD is doing in that respect, because I do think it's really a responsibility of sort of all the stakeholders involved, and there's a lot that companies can do. So for us, we have like internal training programs, and the cool thing about it is that a logistics worker in traditional logistics industry does a lot of like backbreaking work or like a repetitive manual labor. And now that we have this new technology, it actually presents new opportunities and like a path for professional growth as well. So a lot of our employees are like enrolling in our own training program. So we have people who used to work in warehouses, for example, and they're now learning to become drone pilots. There's actually some revitalization in the countryside because we have like a drone delivery program, but it is very automated and very much more efficient than driving something out by truck. However, now you can have someone who's based in their home village in a rural area who's picking things up from the drone sensor and like bringing it to his neighbor, and that has now become like a whole new profession in that village, and it's enabling young people to actually leave the cities that they had to go to for work and go back home and be close to their parents and stuff. So there are just like lots of ways that these things are going to continuously evolve.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that? Like, just in terms of us having a conversation, that's a fascinating. It's a fascinating approach, and I'm curious whether JD whether it works with those people as actual employees, or whether it acts as a platform to enable them to freelance and sort of be independent.
So most of our delivery team is in-house, but actually specifically for the drone program, we do use some contractors and they can freelance. And the interesting thing is like once you start sort of revitalizing or like, spurring the economy in areas that have been depressed for a long time, people start getting attracted to it and there's more consumption there, and then other companies go. So we now also have in that same place that used to have only subsistence farming, now there's call centers, there's like skyscrapers, there's like there's centers where we have like employees who are like tagging things for AI. So there's lots of interesting things going on, and it's sort of like a a domino effect.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can think of the point that all stakeholders should be doing this in all different kinds of ways is a really important one. And I can think of some ways that it's happening in the corporate setting in the United States too, but that there are sort of traditional training programs where you're morphing your assembly line worker into understanding 3D printing technology so that you're doing that kind of thing. But there's also this intersection with creative lifestyle opportunities too in a corporate setting. So, for instance, I was in a regional powerhouse, a grocery store in Des Moines, Iowa recently that talked very extensively about how people who used to work in its bakery were interested and cheese station were interested in developing their skills on that. So they created a whole culinary training kitchen in their centers that train workers from all different facilities in the sort of couple state area around there. And they found that instead of just having people stationed in the grocery store giving their expertise out on cheese, the workers then were using that to be able to extend the catering services of the grocery store and go into people's homes and sort of in both a freelance and a corporate setting. They were doing it for the grocery store as catering experts and sort of party planners and stuff, but they were also then being really interested in being foodies themselves. And so it was leading to the training itself was leading to people's own sort of regeneration of experimentation.
So there's a question from the audience, which actually fits very well. Do you see the focus in education requiring a shift away from training for X job and rather shift to training to think in X way?
Yes, I mean, personally, I think that we should have entrepreneurialism and problem solving in every single thing that we do in the U.S. education system from preschool on up. And it should be, and I looked for this in my own elementary school students' school, like a very specific focus on how do you create the coalition, identify the steps in the sequence, and bring the people together to solve the problem. With that being the key thing that you can apply to anything. You can apply it to coding, you can apply it to kitchen stuff. Like, it doesn't matter what the thing is. It matters that you are confident in doing it, able to present your ideas effectively, and able to think through the steps.
What's your take on that?
I would say, as a person who came up in the American public education system, I totally agree with you. And I think that's not even just a function of like new technology and the new era of work. I think we always should have had that. And I do think that it's sort of like, even if you are training for X job, which the reality is many people will, like many people just want to go to their jobs and do their jobs, right? But those are skills that will definitely help you succeed in those jobs. And I think people rush to opportunities, you know. I mean, I used to be a journalist, so I think that there is a part of it that's about sort of like education in the broad sense of like telling the story of like what people should be, how people should be thinking about the future of work. But people will, when there are opportunities and when those opportunities are like sort of advertised, people will follow them. And I think if we just did a better job of that, you know, that adjustment will also happen.
Okay. And other than training, what are things that can be done or should be done maybe on the politics level that you do see happen somewhere in the States, or you don't see happen? So are there like best practices somewhere or best cases? I mean, you've been traveling around the country so much, and I would be really interested in hearing about what's being done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we absolutely need to think beyond just workforce development to economic stability writ large, which is how do you allow people to create the flexibility in any way to understand that they will be able, their skills will be able to generate some kind of income for them, and that they will be able to sort of increase their economic stability to the point that they can take risks in other things. And you could do that through asset building. You can do it through social support in different ways. You can do it through the workers focus on things that the worker, him or herself, has to do. And so we've seen all those different options. Everything from sort of thinking about how to give workers in gentrifying areas a stake in the development of that area, to how do you think through support for workers who are making a transition into a different kind of on-the-job training. Are there circumstances where companies or government programs or community college programs can pay for the retrain of different, while people are upskilling in different ways? So I think across the board, lots of different options.
Lori, I mean, since you know both countries so very well, it's a very, maybe a very naive question, but what would you say could China learn from what's happening here, and vice versa, looking at a desirable future of work? Like, what is something you would like to see here, and what is something you would like to see in China to make this thing work, this thing called future of work? Right.
I mean, like a lot of the conversation up till now has been focused on like the advancement of technology in China. Of course, workers play a big role in everything that we do, but I do think China is also in the midst of like a kind of industrial revolution in which like they have not come, they haven't undergone as much experience as we have in the US and elsewhere in terms of like protecting workers and making and thinking about like the desires of workers other than their physiological needs. So, in China, what you find often is like workers will get, a market rate salary, maybe even more. In our case, like we try to pay competitively because we have such a large workforce, but, giving them dorms and some lifestyle perks and stuff like that. But now, workers are evolving because unlike the generations before them, where their parents were literally building new cities and being paid very little for it, they now have a good basic minimum wage, and they want to be integrated into society. They want to go to the same schools as their peers in any urban area and stuff like that. So those are things that can definitely improve and are, as you see, the society evolving.
One question I have is, another topic that came up all the time today was the universal basic income, which is such a big topic right now. What do people say what would people say in China about the idea of a universal basic income in a conference setting like this?
I don't know how to answer that question. That'd be very hard. I mean, it's a vast country with lots of different.
Of course, I know that.
And backgrounds.
But I mean, is there any debate that has any similarities to what's happening here right now?
I think that, and this goes to a bit about what I was saying earlier. I think the level of I don't want to say sophistication, but in the evolutionary process of discussing labor in a nation, in an emerging market or any emerging market, it's still earlier on in the process. So there are certain terminologies or debates that happen after you've taken care of the basic needs, and we're still sort of in that basic to middle need stage, I'd say.
Kristin, do you think the future of work is not having to work at all?
No, I don't. Not in the United States. I think we'll never get to a point where the majority of people will not want to work in some way. We see over and over in discussions that purpose, animating purpose, is something that people really get and look for in work, and that the reaction, particularly in rural and rural adjacent areas, but really all over, is not a enthusiastic reception to basic income or things like that in a lot of ways.
It's very sad that Andrew Yang is not here right now, but I think he would be very sad to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the concept of thinking through how to change things on a systemic basis is critically important, and that I like a lot about universal basic income. Thinking about what we can do on a broad basis to connect people with opportunities in different ways. What I've heard from governments at every level and from that about how to institute that is that there'd be significant pushback, and what I've heard from workers, it indicates to me that that's the same.
To me, what I find interesting about the universal basic income debate is that what isn't getting discussed a lot is that I think it's just a very lazy idea. It's a bit like, okay, we can't really, if we can't solve the problem in a good way, let's just throw money at people and keep them happy and silent. And I think that's something that that resonates with me, that people may be too smart to actually fall for that.
I mean, I don't have a reaction to that other than from a practical standpoint. I've seen a lot of enthusiasm for new kinds of opportunities and much less enthusiasm for not having any work-based opportunities at all.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not,
yeah, you never want to be the panel standing between people and the bar.
Exactly. So I think, thank you so much to the both of you, and we invite you now to have a drink. If you have more questions, let's do that over there at the bar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.